Okay, yeah, that'll put Karen back at the podium again, 8.5.
We're doing 8.5?
I also see someone here, I believe, for 8.3.
Okay, so we're doing
Yes.
8.5?
Sure.
Do you feel I'm being cloned tonight a little bit? Hopefully. I'm not even going to mess around with that screen this time. Okay, so another, I did actually think about this before. I really wanted to thank both the city attorney's office and our finance department, which, as you know, is severely understaffed right now with the loss of our administrative services director. They really put a lot of energy in a short amount of time while working on the CIP and the budget to give me a lot of the information that I could feed into both the Charter City and the tax measure report as well as this one. And I just want to acknowledge all that work in the midst of,
Thank you.
I know it's been a very challenging time and a very busy time for them. But we got it done. In December of 2013, at a city council meeting, staff was directed to develop and submit recommendations regarding funding strategies for the Emery shuttle. So, and to come back to the council in April. And as part of that, to convene a stakeholder task force to provide input for staff and recommending a set of proposals for short and long-term funding for the Emery. So this presentation, we'll have a short introduction. We'll talk a little bit about the task force that was set up. Because there's a lot of interest in the Powell Street stop south of the towers, I'll give a very brief and quick update of that. And then we'll go into the funding needs of the Emery, the current funding sources, and then really what are the recommendations for the long-term funding strategies. So this is just in the packet to let everyone know what the Emery shuttle is. It's a shuttle that connects various points of Emeryville with each other, and most especially to the MacArthur BART station in Oakland. The Emery is a no-charge-to-riders service that connects the city to the MacArthur BART station, as I said, as well as connectivity within Emeryville, and also connects to the West Berkeley shuttle. It's considered one of the most successful last-mile shuttles in California, with a ridership approximating 1.56 million boardings in 2013. And it's administered by the private nonprofit Emeryville Transportation Management Association, which consists of the commercial property owners, including owners of rental housing, that contribute to the shuttle's funding. The funding is primarily through a citywide property-based improvement district, which is a special assessment district. We'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. As well as there are some parcels that are directly billed, either through project conditions of approval or developer agreements. For example, as part of the East Bay Bridge Shopping Center, there are parcels that are actually located in Oakland that through that JPA and that developer agreement pay in, but of course would not pay into a Emeryville assessment district. Emery also has two service contracts, one with the West Berkeley shuttle and one with the 8 to Go shuttle, and they make a very small net administrative kind of overhead revenue from those two contracts. And there's some miscellaneous revenue, very small bus ads, interest, those kinds of things. Issues and challenges. The main challenge really are the short-term and long-term funding needs to meet escalating service demands in excess of currently generated revenue. The costs are exceeding revenue primarily due to increases in fuel and maintenance because of the aging fleet, but most because of service needs. The ridership has been going up approximately 200,000 riders for the past couple of years after being stagnant for several years. And the way that the Emery funding is structured, the only new money that really comes in is through new structures being built in Emeryville. And while we certainly do have economic development and housing development in Emeryville, it's based upon a per unit or a per structural foot charge, and so it really doesn't meet kind of an expansion in ridership capacity necessarily. And so we are now seeing that the ridership, because of higher tenancy rates, as well as some of the new development, we have quite a few buses now that they're standing room only, or in fact are passing up stops. So there's a need for capital funds for additional rolling stock. Right now, there is some additional capacity that's being met through essentially leasing additional buses, and capital funds for a long-term bus yard. The current bus yard is the lease was been extended, but the way the lease is structured, that they can give 6 months notice to vacate the property, which essentially it's a month-to-month lease almost.
Wow.
And there really is a need for a long-term bus yard. And there's some equity concerns that have been raised regarding the current primary funding source. So the Emery Ground Task Force was established in January based upon council direction, and it was charged with assisting staff in developing a set of recommendations regarding the Emery Ground. And the task force consisted of the mayor, the TMA board president, representatives from the city's planning commission, economic development advisory committee, finance advisory committee, and commission on aging, as well as 3 other residents and 2 others from the business community. And everyone that was appointed to this task force attended at least 2 meetings. And the task force met 4 times between mid-January and late March. And we elicited perspectives, interests, concerns, and ideas from those that ride or financially contribute to the shuttle system. And while there were not really, this was not a task force that was advisory to council, so there's not a set of recommendations from the task force, but it was, I would say, almost like a working meeting. Mayor Asher, you were there, in which kind of it was more of an iterative type of discussion between staff and the stakeholders to come up with either recommendations that were understood by the stakeholders, and in some cases actually put forward by the stakeholders, or issues were around them were thoroughly discussed. So while the Emery Ground wasn't necessarily tasked with solving the issue of the Powell Street bus stop, obviously that's something that came up and was a lot of interest to those at the table. And so, as you may recall, that when the city began constructing the sidewalk on Powell Street near the Watergate condominiums, that stop was taken off route by the TMA. And it was later reinstated based upon, in response to community requests and council requests, and it's there now. And one of the issues was that the way that stop had been served was that after making that stop, there was a U-turn that was done, and the bus headed back to, headed back west, rather east on Powell. And that was just not possible when the sidewalk construction project was done. At the end of the sidewalk project, at the same time that that kind of happened, there was a change in vendor and bus operator. And the idea of doing a U-turn with particularly the longer buses that were now being used for capacity reasons made a U-turn unwise and not, I would say, a best practice for a bus operation. And so the city, Maurice, met with the TMA a few times to discuss some various alternatives, including potential of taking out some of the improvements that were done, moving the sidewalk onto potentially Watergate property with their permissions to allow greater turning radius, expanding the turning radius by pushing out the sidewalk. And even with all of those possibilities, at the end of the day, making a U-turn was just not something that was operationally best practice, and the current bus vendor did not feel that it was something that they could instruct their drivers to do. And so at this point, staff is not pursuing a U-turn anymore, and the buses will continue to turn around at the marina parking lot as they're doing right now, and not have to make a U-turn. At the end of the day, because making a U-turn in which particularly you're at the far right, and you're essentially making a U-turn that might be swinging into a crossing for pedestrians, swinging through another traffic lane to make a U-turn into essentially oncoming traffic and back, was just not considered to be a practice that the current vendor felt that it was advisable to have their drivers do. So the buses are turning around at the marina parking lot. And so, go back down. Okay, so back to budget. So this is a 3-year budget projection that the TMA did. There was a route and ridership survey that was, I think, attached also to your packet, in which there were some route efficiencies that were projected, as well as some additional service. One, to have better east-west connectivity, and to more balance out some of the routes where there was some particular bunches of riders, and so in order to take some of these steps for year 2014, the TMA board did vote to expand service approximately about $200,000 over what projected revenue is, with the idea that the shortfall could be made up for either through requesting additional money from the city. One of the actions that we're requesting that you give staff direction on is that there is $70,000 in unallocated cash reserves in the PBID fund balance that the city holds. So we are recommending that council direct staff to prepare an amendment that will come back to you probably on May 20th to be able to cut that check to the TMA. So that would be $70,000 of that. And then right now they have, the TMA itself holds about $600,000 in cash reserve, which could also be used for this cause. If we're looking in the next couple of years in order to meet additional ridership, and I just want to give a caveat that we are also asking that that staff work with the TMA to conduct a greater ridership study than currently. The current ridership study did not really take into account some of the development that we're expecting over the next 5 years. That would be a supplement to what was done. And to kind of look at revenue generated from those developments, assuming that the PBID is renewed, versus what it would take to serve those developments. And so that's not in this calculation, and we believe that that will be more. But just looking at what with kind of the ridership projections just based upon increased tenancy and use, we're looking at 25% more capacity needs than we have now. And so a very conservative estimate, what would be needed for 2014, as I said, was an additional $200,000 over revenue. And looking at 2015, assuming that the TMA recommends and the council accepts a 2.5% levy increase for 2014-15, then we're talking over a $400,000 shortfall in order to maintain service levels and quality consistent to what it is now. And obviously, that would, at best, completely deplete any cash reserves that were available, whether it would be for fuel increases or unexpected maintenance or anything. And you would be looking really at, by 2015, either essentially freezing service levels at where they are now, with the buses passing by folks that want to ride and that kind of de-escalation of service, or the obvious need to look at more revenue. So the projected funding, short-term funding gap for 2014 is $200,000, and for 2015, $430,000. In your packet, or not in your packet, on your dais, you do see a letter from Wareham and I would say that this was written on Wareham, but I was at the TMA board meeting last week, and it's fair enough that this is actually represents the what the TMA board actually voted to send a letter regarding a request for additional funding, and I have no doubt that given that I see people from the TMA here, they'll be speaking on their behalf. So what staff is recommending is that in the short term for 2014, that it's the city provide the additional cash reserve of $70,000 to the TMA, and that the rest of the money needed for 2014 come out of the TMA cash reserves, and that for 2015 that the city consider for that service year supplemental general funds, but that be considered as part of the mid-cycle fiscal year 15-16 budget process. More will be known in terms of, there'll be a little bit better, I think, information on exactly what the nature of the beast is in terms of the funding needs. And of course, if the city does go through with putting a tax measure on the ballot, that will be more additional information that the city would have in terms of just how much, if any, supplemental general fund could be provided. And so we think that get through 2014 and then address 2015 with a little bit more information base. Long term, this was something that was discussed a lot at the task force, is that I would say the consensus of the group was that the renewing of the citywide PBID is the best long-term revenue stream for the Emery shuttle. It's generating about 2.7 million, or a little bit under than that now. When you and so there really isn't an alternative revenue stream that is likely to be able to support that level of funding in the way that the PBID does. And so one of our requests is that staff be directed to start that renewal process, and that is working with the TMA as well as other stakeholders to determine the structure of a renewal, to obtain the services of an assessment engineer to be part of that process, to look at the various issues, including whether or not there's any general benefit that needs to be funded outside of the PBID, because a PBID only funds what's deemed to be special benefit to those paying into the assessment, as well as, you know, what would be kind of the amount of money that would be raised by a PBID, and whether the PBID stakeholders feel that all of that money should be supported by the PBID, or should there be some other supplemental funding sources. And also, of course, to obtain transportation grants with a focus on capital needs, with assuming that Measure B passes. While certainly the shuttle money is competitive, I think everyone believes that the Emery shuttle would be on the top of the list of those grants, of those grant requests. So the current citywide PBID includes commercial, rental housing, and live-work parcels, except for in residentially zoned areas. It exempts homeowner housing and other parcels in residentially zoned areas. It's a 10-year renewal process that ends in fiscal year 15-16, which is service year 2016. The Emery operates on a calendar year for their service. So if the PBID was not renewed, essentially funding would run out by the end of 2016, and that's not factoring in, well, there probably wouldn't be a ramping up with a deficit if it was going to be ending. And it generates approximately $2.7 million per year, as I said. And the TMA board membership includes the 7 highest access property owners, a Chamber of Commerce rep, a 1 property owner at large, and 1 direct build housing representative, which has been vacant. And in fact, I believe
That's interesting.
the general membership meeting in May 16th, I believe it is, will be looking to asking the members to change that last representative to being either that could be also an additional property owner of any type. So the current PBID levy is about $256 per 1,000 square foot. It's 0.256, or a little over 20, a bit more than a quarter, or under 26 cents per square foot. With industrial, for commercial office uses and retail uses. Industrial use and warehouse use is half of that, or 0.128, or a little under 13 cents, excuse me, per square foot. And residential units or other housing units that pay because of conditions of approval, right now they're paying $127.70 per unit per year. So a PBID renewal, staff would recommend that the process be done in a way with an assumption that a Prop 218 ballot would occur in spring of 2015. That would be after any ballot initiatives, after, let's say, any tax measures that the council might put in November would have already passed. And it would be more than a year before the current PBID ends, so there would be the possibility to adjust if it did not pass. PBID law now permits bond financing for capital improvements such as rolling stock, i.e. buses, or the bus yard. This is something that's new to PBID law, and it's something that we would ask our assessment engineer to look at as part of what they are charged with. And recent PBID assessment districts have included residential properties, if identified by the assessment engineer's report, as receiving similar special benefit as commercial properties. This is not part of PBID law, but it really is a constitutional issues in that there have been several different types of parcel taxes that are now saying that you have to treat residents the same as commercial property owners if the benefit is similar or the same. You're seeing that now in some school parcels now, in which you can't do the split rolls anymore. And in addition, what the assessment engineer would look at is if there's any part of what's being provided that is considered general as opposed to special benefit, and that would have to be extracted out of what would be put into the PBID for those assessment levies to pay for. So, as was mentioned before, residential households can now be included in a PBID if it's considered that residential parcels receive the same special benefit. Kind of the case that was used were that bids in general business improvement districts oftentimes include residents. So if you are sweeping the sidewalks in kind of your classic downtown property business, your basic business improvement district, and there's residents above the businesses, they're both receiving the same special benefit of that sidewalk being steam cleaned. So similarly, if the assessment engineer says that residential parcels are receiving a similar special benefit as commercial properties for the Emeryville, then they could be put into the PBID. If that happened, that would obviously expand the number of parcels that are assessed and potentially expand the revenue generated by the PBID. It would also address current equity issues between residential complexes. Right now, we have our rental complexes paying in and our more recent condominium complexes paying through conditions of approval or developer agreements. But older complexes don't pay in, and of course, some of those residents were here for 20 or 30 years, and some of those residents here were there less time than some of the new condo residents. And so there's some sense that potentially there's some equity issues regarding residential complexes right now. And it would address the issue also that while condominiums that are rented out are subject to the PBID, so for example, Watergate, where my understanding is 50% of the units are rented out, technically, if they're rented out and there is a commercial landlord business license being paid for, they should be paying into the PBID. on a practical note, administratively, that is a difficult thing to do when that status, can change from year to year. So that's another amount of money that we're foregoing that really legitimately should be paying in. And it would then also potentially provide for residential representation in the decision-making. One of the things that's voted upon when a PBID is put up to the ballot is the management plan includes governance. And right now, the governance of the TMA services, the Emeryville, are pretty much commercial. There is, as I said, a seat for someone who is paying through like one of those condo associations that are paying through a developer agreement, but that seat has been empty. To give you a little sense of what could be generated potentially, hopefully you can see this, but if you look right now, given what's being paid now, the $127.70 per unit, that the current residential units that are either in the PBID or are paying through developer fees, essentially, we're getting a bit less. We're getting less than we're getting a little bit more than $190,000, or the PBID is getting, or the Emeryville is getting less than, a little bit more than $190,000 from those residential units. If you included the other residential units, then that jumps up based upon what would be paid now. That would be now $620,600 as opposed to the $191,550. And so you can see that including residential units would provide additional revenue to the Emeryville. And so based upon some potential, I went less, not more. Again, what would be the fair amount would be something that the assessment engineer, that would be part of their work, is that staff estimates that by including all the residential units, that would add additional, essentially $250,000 to $400,000 a year, depending on what that rate was, and assuming that we probably wouldn't collect from every parcel.
Can I ask real quickly? It looks like it actually is up to $620,000 per year in that second column. Am I seeing something wrong?
Right, but the difference is subtract the 191 from the 620.
Oh, I thought
that's the additional more money.
I thought the 620 was on top of the 190. Am I wrong?
Oh no, I'm sorry. You are right. I'm sorry. You are right. It is the additional money.
If it stayed at the same rate and we just added in the other residential
yeah.
units. Okay.
So other fundings, general fund could be used to address general benefit versus special benefit if the assessment engineer says that that is warranted. It could also be addressed city priorities, interest in going to places that are outside of what a PBID would support, or also fluctuations in ridership. I said, PBID is a bit of a static funding model in that it's, it's based upon structural square footage, and it's the same whether, it's 100% tenanted, that building, or in fact 0% tenanted. Well, we've seen that as we've had, and it also doesn't vary based upon shifts in modality. So for example, as we've seen higher tenancy rates, we've seen ridership go up. And I also think because of the demographics of who is now working in Emeryville, we're seeing more people shifting to public transit than, or putting their bike on the Emeryville and doing that type of shift as opposed to taking their cars. And so due to competing general fund priorities in addition to the Emeryville, as you know, we have asked you to consider other tax measures. It's something that the Emeryville Task Force was very interested in. There's potential for some other additional revenue sources, such as I know that the Finance Committee was very interested in looking at parking meters. And we believe that's another source of revenue that could either augment the general fund or could be dedicated to alternative transportation, including the Emeryville shuttle. We are not recommending that that there be any tax measure that is reserved for in-ground funding, as that would trigger the 2/3 voting requirement. And we, quite frankly, as you'll see when we get to the budget in a few weeks, our revenues are very flat. And for some of the other important priorities that the city has, whether it's public safety or better maintenance, there may be the need for additional funding for that. So to wrap it up, these are the requested actions. One is to direct staff to prepare an amendment to the immigrant compensation agreement to release the cash reserves of $70,000, to consider other short-term funding. By that, we're talking about service year 15, 2015, as part of the mid-cycle budget process. Which usually occurs in, I think it's usually late winter of 2015. To direct staff to work with the TMA to develop a projected budget based upon the economic development and housing developments under construction, approved for construction, or in the approval process that were not included in the current ridership projections. And also to, as I said, to direct staff to obtain the services of assessment engineer, and to work with the TMA and other stakeholders to analyze options for a PBID renewal. And that would be on a timeline that to go to a Prop 218 ballot process in the spring of 2015.
Okay. Let's hear from the, do you have questions?
I just have a couple quick questions for you. You didn't mention something that came up in January or December, maybe, when we discussed with the community that Emery Go Round was required as a mitigation measure for certain development projects, and whether that factors in at all, I guess, in terms of either the funding or the existence.
The conditions that we have reviewed to date either say one of two things. Either it says that the condition is that the development shall provide some type of weekly shuttle without anything further. In the case of East Bay Bridge Shopping Center, it's to provide a weekly shopper shuttle. It doesn't say more than that. Once the TMA was founded, what we're seeing is that most of the conditions simply said that the developer will pay what the TMA levies for the operation of the Emeryville shuttle. It doesn't give a dollar amount. And so we could do more on this, but kind of our thought is that given what the language is, it's really not anything to put your hat on in terms of what that would mean in actual dollars into the pot to be able to maintain the service that we have now. And certainly if you're thinking of it from a mitigation standpoint, I'm not sure if there would be a court that would think that a $2.9 million service is warranted by the mitigation of traffic being generated. It's really a project-based mitigation, and this is now a citywide service. So it's difficult to kind of, if it went away, there would be some obligation. What that is.
Okay. That's helpful.
It wouldn't be at this level, and there would be a lot of, let's say, discussion, shall we say.
Right, so this is satisfying a number of conditions, but it's probably going beyond what those actually require.
If
perhaps
we
it
were
depends
just resting on the conditions as done, I think that there is a lot of ambiguity on what that would mean in actual revenues being provided.
Okay. Secondly, I actually am very interested in the report that you mentioned, and I did not see it in our packet. I think maybe it was an oversight. It wasn't included. The TMA report.
The ridership?
The ridership. Was that in the packet? I didn't see it.
No.
Okay.
Okay. If not,
Send it to us. That would be great.
Send it to you.
And then finally, you talked about renewing the PBID and the Prop 218 ballot process, and I just wondered if, in a very short, brief summary, you could say what that process is. Is that a mail-in ballot? Is it a protest? Not a
protest ballot. And so I keep on looking at the city attorney, so I'm not saying like election or, or
I'm not sure ballot's even the right word.
Exactly.
I think it's a protest.
Well, it's a ballot. It's a mail-in ballot, and it's what's considered a protest vote. And so it's based upon the ballots that are returned, not the total universe of ballots that are out there. And for an assessment district, it's oftentimes the phrase is use $1 a vote, which has negative connotations and other issues, but what it means is that the vote is weighed according to what you pay into the, what you would potentially pay for the assessment. So a property owner that is paying, let's say, would be potentially paying $10,000 into the assessment, essentially has 10,000 votes.
Okay.
And someone who would only be paying $500 into the assessment has 500 votes, and that's tallied up. And so it's a protest vote, so it's of whoever returns the ballot. If 50%, if the weighted vote of 50% plus 1 is negative, then the assessment fails. If it's not, essentially, whoever doesn't vote is considered to be silent. So essentially, this is really a case of if you don't vote, you don't count.
Okay, thank you. It sounds similar to what Stop Waste is doing with the household hazardous waste fee right now.
Right. And so, yeah.
There's one other little nuance to it that's sort of new, and I do my best to try to explain it, but it sort of avoids a situation where you just have a couple of large property owners who are being assessed, sort of stack the ballot. So if and I forget what the rule is exactly because it's something new. So you can't just have the measure or the assessment passed by virtue of having 2 very large property owners vote in favor of it. So there's some changes to that.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, let's hear from the public on this item.
You've been very patient. It's late.
I think it's like wise to look at the history of the Emery go-round. As everybody remembers, it was started by some businesses in town because they were concerned that there was so much traffic that their tenants and their clients and their customers couldn't get to and employees couldn't get to their businesses. So that's why they started the thing, and it was a free shuttle. And then, so run by businesses for their own use, open to the public. And then what happened is as more the ridership started going up by just general members of the public using the shopping malls, and for whatever reasons, the businesses started feeling uncomfortable because they started feeling like put upon, and they're not running a charity, they're trying to run a business, and I don't blame them for being concerned about that. And so then we reached a crisis where they sort of, as everybody remembers, they they're threatened to stop service, at least somewhat. The problem is, in the meantime, this thing is built up in Emeryville, as Ms. West noted. There have been projects, CEQA documents associated with projects that have taken the existence of the Emery go-round into account. So we have to continue this bus service. The city has overdeveloped, and so the street capacity is now overtaxed, and so we have to have this bus service. So we got a problem here that businesses don't want to, they want to run it, but they don't want to. They want to run it their way, and they want to not feel put upon, and they don't want to feel like they're running a charity. And yet we have to have the bus service. So clearly this is a place where government belongs, I believe. And so this should be not run by a PBID, in my opinion. It should be run by the government, just old-fashioned style. And the way that we should get the money is by taxing businesses. So we should take the power for running the Emery go-round away from the businesses, but make them pay for it. This is what I think we should do. And residents shouldn't pay for it because, once again, we're building a city for our benefit. And we're the ones that count here, and the businesses here are here at our pleasure, insofar that the Constitution allows them to be here. Beyond that, anything beyond that, they are here at our pleasure. So I think we should just do it like the old-fashioned way. It's a service that we now are kind of have to do, and so it's just be run by the business, by the government, by the city hall, and paid for by taxes from businesses, old-fashioned way, and that's what I think how we should do it. Thank you.
What else? Jeff?
Good evening, Jeffrey Sears. I'm here in my capacity as president of the TMA. Whoops.
That thing is just not.
No.
Computer's like,
We had a board meeting last week, and the board voted unanimously for me to bring 4 different points to you tonight. The board has consistently reaffirmed its belief in the system, its value, and their interest in maintaining it. Karen did go through that a lot of that is volunteerism, because if it falls back onto the conditions, it could be splintered into something that just works very differently than it does now. The board in general doesn't want that. But the points they wanted me to make are these. The staff is recommending that you ask them to work on a new renewal of the PBID. And the board is willing to work on that with you, but we want you to make the same level of commitment that you will ask the people who pay for the PBID to make, which is a 10-year binding financial commitment. The people you'll ask to do that in the PBID renewal won't have the ability to decide every year to do it or not. It'll be a 10-year commitment, and we think in the spirit of partnering, the city should also make a financial commitment. Now, we think it's terrific if there are other ways to pay for that so that the general fund doesn't. You talked about TOT, Karen mentioned grants, other things. So it's really, the key is the commitment, and we think if you make that commitment, what will happen is staff will take that very seriously and work very hard to find other people's money to fulfill that commitment. But we think it's really important, the partnering approach, if you want other people to commit to 10 years, that you do that with us. So that's number 1. I think it's the right message if you're going to ask this to continue. Number 2 is about our deficits. And, you know, in good faith, the board dipped into its reserves to cover the deficits that have been running for the last several years, and you saw this year's projection, and that will probably run a bigger deficit than that, but in good faith, we chose to fund those this year to try to give us time together to work on a plan for the future. We can't do that in 2015. We don't have the money to keep service the level it is and fund the deficit. We just don't. We budget in the summer, and we need to bring it to you for conceptual review at the end of the summer, early fall. So we have to plan for next year now. And so the staff has said, well, let's have you all weigh in about maybe giving us some money next year. We can't wait. We can't decide we're going to run out of gas in the middle of the year and hope you have some for us. We have to be prudent and form a budget for 2015 that we know we have money for, because we can't spend hope dollars, you know, we can only spend real greenbacks. So we would like you, in the spirit of partnering, to commit to fund half of the projected deficits. We're not sure what they are, but we're willing to cap them, understanding the issues with city government and funding. They're projected at $413,000, so we're asking you to fund half of them up to a maximum of $206,000 so that we can budget a sustained level of service in 2015. That's number 2. Number 3, we'd like you similarly to fund a little bit of money this year now, $50,000 split 50-50 with us, so that we can work together to try to find some of those other sources of money. Find them now, so that maybe your deficit promise can be covered by other people's money. You know, Alameda County has a tax measure that's going to be on the votes. It needs to get voted for. It didn't get voted for last time. Very close, but it lost. It needs to be voted for, and then if it's voted for, Emeryville needs to get its share, which historically has been hard because we're a little community. So we'd like you to split that with us now, because that's work that has to happen now. That's number 3. And then number 4, we'd like you to prioritize in your 5-year CIP assistance that has been in the old plan to help us plan for a bus yard. It's a risk we don't have a plan for. We had built up a lot of the reserves that we've been spending, anticipating that's going to be a problem, and it will be a problem. We don't know when, but it will be. And you had also put it in the plan, recognizing the problem. It's now up for grabs in terms of it's not been put on the list officially by the staff and the recommendations, we'd like you to put it on. I know other committees have recommended that too. That's number 4. So we think that's part of the spirit of partnering that's been a key part of the Emery go-round from its inception. Some of these things need to happen now for the reasons I've stated. We think all of this will make it able to go into the future successfully and run the way it has been as a major service to many people. Thank you.
Hello, Ken Bukowski, Executive Director of the Emeryville Property Owners Association. First, I'm dismayed with the entire process. We have a new city manager, and now we have staff committees that don't even involve the public. I mean, you know, this is an issue that affects everybody, and I think the community needs to weigh in on it. Secondly, the task force really didn't consider all the funding options. I mean, they really narrowed it down to the P-bid. Now, if you're going to try to renew a P-bid, do you really think that keeping this corporate structure in place is going to work? You got 10-member board and 7 of them are assigned seats. Who is going to vote for something that has a corporate board with 7 seats? I mean, you have 7 members who don't even pay the majority of the assessment controlling the board. That's the same as saying, well, all the businesses pay the taxes in the city, so why don't they control the city? I mean, I don't think that's going to fly. And I know that considerable money will be spent to make sure that it doesn't happen that way. Now, the Property Owners Association has invested a lot of time with Alameda County. We can get $2 million a year for the Emery go-round, and the conditions of approval can be used to supplement that, because they'll be looking for matching funds. If we're going to give money to help this along, then you give money to the county to support the ballot measure. That's what we're going to do. We're going to give money to the county to support the ballot measure with the idea, there can't be any guarantee, but that we'll get the funding. I mean, we hired Stewart to go to the board, and they changed the funding to make it work. And I think it can work. But there's no need to assess the residents when you got the county money. We'll be giving $7 million a year to the county, and getting $2 million back is not much to ask. You know, once that's approved, they'll have $8 billion that they can control for 30 years, and you're not going to have much say after that. So now's the time to help and work with the county and get the support we need. So you don't have to fund, you don't have to have the residents pay. And the task force didn't consider anything, again, what the community wanted, and I think that's very important. Thank you.
Betsy Cooley, resident. I just wanted to support what Jeff had to say. I was on the task force. I've been going to the TMA meetings for almost all of them, I think, for the last several years. I've really been following it very, very closely, and, you know, I've read a number of the different lawsuits and everything that involved the PBID. And I think the Emery ground is really incredibly important to the city in general, residents, you know, businesses, shoppers, the community in general. I think it's really important. And I do think that it's important that the city, as Jeff said, partner with the residents and with the businesses, because I think there are a lot of general benefits that don't apply just to the residents or just to the businesses. And I just think it's going to be a stronger base if we all do gather together and support it. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Trudy Presser. I'm the Executive Director for the Emeryville TMA, and I just wanted to emphasize, certainly concur with all of Jeff's points. Those points were made at our board meeting last week, but also to emphasize the urgency of our shortfall. It was mentioned that we did hire an outside transit consultant. I believe the staff report did make reference to it. And their conclusions, after looking at just our existing capacity and the existing ridership, and with some information on known near-term and developments in the city, they actually recommended a 25% increase now to our system. And that's in the report. We as staff knew we couldn't afford that, and we had to take a hard look at our contingency funds, and without any supplemental funding for this year, we've only implemented, or we plan to implement and budgeted for a 10% increase. So it is a real crisis we feel we're facing, and we're hoping that our fleet holds out this year without any other supplemental funding, but I would like to hear a little bit more clarification on your timing for what you're suggesting for the general fund mid-cycle budget process, and how soon that would be, or if their discussion could be sooner than that, because we're going to be faced this next month. We go back to our board with our preliminary budget for next year and starting that conversation on what our recommendation is for our assessment, and it's going to be a very difficult time for us without knowing some more secure feedback from you on any supplemental funds that may be available, particularly in the beginning of 2015. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joyce Jacobson, resident, and also I served on the task force. I only want to speak about the long-term funding. But first I'd like to say that my impression from the report that was given by the consultants that studied the ridership, they emphasized two things, which was, one is that our Emery-go-round has an enviable record of use. We have extremely high use. And along with that, we are very efficient in the use of the funds. We have high use, and that brings about naturally fairly low per ride. You know, in the transportation industry, Ruth knows a lot more about this than I do, they figure it per ride, what it costs per ride. So the model that we're using, the PBID, has actually worked extremely well, and having the business community in charge has worked well. But things have changed, and you know, as you know, the citizens or residents of Emeryville depend very heavily on this. It's their lifeline, their main transportation, and the city itself needs to have a bus service. So there are more than just business needs now, and the PBID was focused and has taxed the business for that. So I'd like to see in the development of the new PBID that all three stakeholders are involved, which are the businesses, the city, and the residents being a significant stakeholder. The consultants seem to say that the overwhelming number of users are people going to and from work and people coming from out of the city to shop. However, even though the residents are a minority of users, it's a very critical service for them to get around Emeryville and to get to both things. So I'd like to see all three of them also provide funds for the new bid. I'd like to see the residents provide some funds. I'd like to see the city provide funds, and I'd like to see that built into the structure so that that's understood for the 10 years of the PBID. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? No? Okay. Council? Oh, yeah.
My knees are not working too well tonight. Sue Kelly. I know for some reason it's never been explained to me why we can't charge for ridership, but it seems to be like the conductors of the buses don't want to worry with money. They're afraid somebody's going to come on and take the money. But if everybody had a card and they just had to pay a quarter, I mean, if you get, I don't know how many million people ride it every year, that's at least $250,000 right there if everybody just paid a quarter. And I don't know why we can't charge, you know, a quarter. That anybody has a quarter, but it would certainly add to the pot a little bit, I think, and I don't see why we can't do that somehow. Because I have a Clipper card that I can go from here, you know, out to the zoo if I want to. And it's just a card, and you just press it on the thing, and it lets you in. And I don't know why we can't all get little cards and just press a little button, and nobody has to have any money at all except you buy your card. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know why we can't charge.
Thanks, Sue. Anyone else? No? Okay, from council?
I would just go with the staff report and direct staff to do what was outlined in the 5 items.
Is that a motion to approve the 4 staff recommendations?
I thought there was 5 staff recommendations. We can go back to it.
Okay. I'd second that motion.
Can I ask staff to respond as to the timing of the 2015 mid-budget cycle adjustment?
That usually, in the past, has happened in early spring. So the budget for 14-15 would be adopted in June of this year. And then sometime in early spring of 2015, we take a look to see if we're still on track, either unforeseen expenses, or sometimes different revenue projections would cause a change in the budget. And we usually look at, because we do a 2-year budget in the city, we're adjusting for fiscal year 14-15. And at that point, we usually have if there might be something in 15-16 that's also looked at. So I think what we're hearing from the TMA is that they're making their decisions in this summer for next year. And staff's recommendation is for the city to consider any supplemental funding for 2015 and really spring of 2015.
And as I recall, we make those adjustments when we close the books from the previous fiscal year. Is that true? Is that when there's leftover funds that we determine what to do?
I think that has been the practice here is, it's been, around the December timeframe once the books are closed, looking at those numbers. I will say, though, in light of kind of the action that you took earlier tonight, in the event that the transfer tax goes through, I mean, we would be coming forward to you, depending on, what you all decide and what those revenue projections may look like, we'd be coming to you with possible adjustment to the budget around that same time frame anyways.
I always thought of the mid-cycle budget adjustment as more of at the end of the fiscal year as we're looking at the second year of our budget cycle. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure if it was the same thing. Yeah.
It's not unusual that we're making some adjustment for the fiscal year that we're in, as well as the next year, being a little closer.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible just to flip back to the staff recommendations as they showed up, I think, in the last slide? I apologize that I'd like to just...
Page 495.
Oh. Thank you very much.
So there's only 4. I'm sorry, only 4. My motion was for the 4.
Does staff see any way that we could consider that short-term funding at an earlier time that would coincide with the TMA's budgeting needs?
We certainly could. I mean, we could bring that forward as part of this budget process if you wanted us to, since it's a 2-year budget. It's just a matter of, kind of how much information we would have at that point.
Right. Yeah. Would anyone else on the council
I would support that.
I would support bringing that forward.
Great.
It's so easy at 4:40.
Things get much easier.
Well, I also support the actions with that change.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right.
Excuse me 1 second. I'm planning.
Okay.
I assume we're not taking a break, Mayor? Just checking. I forgot to eat dinner before the meeting, so I'm just checking.
You're just wondering.
Yeah, no,
it's late for people.
It's too late.
It's very late.
Okay, I'll just stand up again.
So just to make sure that I understand the motion, it was
Staff's recommendation.
yes, staff recommendation by Brinkman and Davis. Where did I say? Oh, Brinkman and Davis, except for number 2 is to bring it forth as part of the fiscal year 14-15 budget as opposed to the 15-16 budget.
That's right.
Now you guys can go home and go to bed. Have a cognac for me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we give awards to the people who stayed latest tonight, just so you know.
8.7, so let's go ahead and do that. Can we now move on to item 8.7? I see some folks that are here for this. This is a Transportation Committee.